My name is Maya, and for as long as I can remember, I had carried the weight of other people's expectations like a heavy coat I could never take off. I'm 30, freshly divorced, and in the last 3 years I've been secretly paying my mother's rent. It's ironic, isn't it? The woman who spent my entire childhood telling me I was useless, who mocked my choices, belittled my efforts, and found joy in pointing out my failures, was living in comfort because of my hard work. Every light she switched on, every quiet evening where she didn't have to worry about her bills, every whisper of relief when the rent cleared, it was because of me. And she had no idea, or maybe she did. Maybe she thrived on knowing I would always come through. Tonight we were all at a family dinner, the kind where everyone laughed too loud, tried to appear close, and hid behind polite conversation while tension simmered under the table. My mother, Diane, decided tonight would be the night she reminded everyone of my so-called uselessness. She laughed in front of my father, my aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone, her voice sharp and piercing like glass breaking. "How does it feel to be useless, daughter?" she demanded, loud enough that no one could ignore her. For a brief moment, my stomach nodded in its old way, that reflex to shrink, apologize, explain myself. But the reflex was gone. I looked her straight in the eyes, calm, steady. "Feels great," I said, letting the words hang in the air, "since I just stopped paying your rent." The silence hit like a thunderclap. Forks clinked, murmurs froze. Mid-word, my father's fork slipped from his hand and bounced against his plate.
His eyes widened, confusion mixing with disbelief. "What? Rent? Why?" he asked, voice sharp and incredulous.
My mother's face went through the rapid changes. I knew so well, shock, anger, search for a way to twist my words. But I didn't flinch. This wasn't a slip. This was carefully planned, every word rehearsed, every witness placed by design. For months, I had constructed this moment, meticulously, like an architect of my own liberation. "Don't be dramatic," my mother said, trying to force a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a joke, you know how sensitive she is?" But I didn't allow her to finish. "I'm not joking," I said, keeping my eyes locked on my dad. "For 3 years I've been paying your rent, your utilities, covering expenses from my salary, from my divorce settlement. You've been living as if nothing is owed, and you've mocked me for being useless. I'm done." My father's face changed from confusion to pale to something I hadn't seen in years. A sharp, cold anger that seemed to chill the air around him. "Is that true?" he asked Diane, slow and deliberate. "Have you been taking money from her without telling me?" My mother straightened in her chair, shoulders stiff, the mask of composure flickering but holding just enough. "Oh, please," she said, scoffing. "You know how she exaggerates. I needed a little help after my hours got cut. I didn't want to burden you, so I asked Maya. That's what family does." I repeated calmly, letting the weight of my words land. "A little help? For 3 years, I've paid your rent, every month, utilities included. You called me crying, threatening homelessness, blaming me for your failures if I didn't come through. And all along, everyone at this table thought I was the problem." The room hummed with disbelief. My father looked at me, then at her, voice low. "I never knew any of this. You told me you were fine. You said you had it under control." "I did," she said sharply, trying to reclaim the narrative. "And now she wants to humiliate me because she's bitter about her divorce." I laughed silently inside, but let the truth roll out steadily. "You humiliated me first. You used me as a safety net, then mocked me for being useless. This isn't about bitterness. This is about control. As long as I was paying, you could call me worthless and know I'd show up again and again." My father's eyes softened briefly, the confusion giving way to understanding. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Every time I tried," I replied, "you were used as leverage." You know what she would say? "You're just like your father, always running when it's hard." And I believed her. I thought I owed her my life. I could feel the gaze of everyone in the restaurant, but I didn't care. This wasn't a confrontation. This was evidence. And evidence doesn't need permission to speak. I remembered the first night it started. I had just moved into a tiny apartment after my divorce, boxes still unpacked, the lingering smell of my old life in the air. The phone rang. My mother was sobbing. "They're raising the rent," she said, voice breaking. "Your father doesn't care. You'll have to help. You can't abandon me now." I had offered help then, voice tight, throat raw. "Just until you get back on your feet." That 1 month became 3, then 12, each extension backed by guilt and manipulation, each thank you coded in quiet threats. After everything I sacrificed, if you don't help, who will? I had swallowed those words, let them root inside me. I had believed her version of love, but that night something shifted. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't shrinking. I pulled from my bag the envelope I had prepared, bank statements, screenshots, transfer confirmations, and the new lease agreement that was mine alone. The weight of it was real in my hand. "What is that?" my mother asked, voice tight. "Proof," I said, laying it on the table. "Of everything, every transfer, every loan, every lie." My father's hand moved gently, pulling the papers from under her, and the room leaned in, drawn by a silence heavier than any shouting. I watched as my mother's carefully curated image fractured. She tried to laugh it off. "You're overreacting," she said, but her eyes betrayed panic. Her mask had no defense against evidence. Messages, numbers, deadlines, transfers all laid bare. "No," I said. "You laughed at my pain. You mocked me for being useless. And all this while living in an apartment I paid for. Tonight is not about humiliation. Tonight is about accountability. Your consequences are yours." The air vibrated with tension. Nearby tables paused in mid-conversation. A teenager tried discreetly to record, but her phone shook in her hands as she watched the unraveling. I stayed calm. My father, the quiet observer of decades, finally understood. "Maya, this shouldn't have been necessary," he said softly. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Those words were heavier than any insult, more satisfying than revenge, because they confirmed that truth, finally, could pierce the lies. The night continued. My mother tried deflection, denial, half-truths. But my evidence didn't waver. Sarah, my aunt, quietly supported me, bringing another layer of validation. Patterns, past abuses, corroborations of the ways my mother had manipulated not just me, but others in the family. Each revelation chipped away at the control she had wielded for years. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to play recordings. The proof was in the facts. In her own lies. In the truth she had tried to bury. And at that table in that crowded restaurant, for the first time, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Not small, not guilty. Not responsible for her choices. Free. The last words were mine. "From next month your landlord will call you, not me. I've stopped being your safety net. I am not your emotional wallet, your punching bag, or your backup plan." My life started getting better the second I stopped trying to prove I wasn't useless to you. And with that I pushed my chair back, legs scraping the floor, a final definitive sound that echoed the years of hidden labor, of silent suffering, of manipulated guilt. I had chosen myself. Tonight I reclaimed my life. The envelope sat between us like a silent judge, each page a testament to years of hidden labor, of quiet sacrifices, of an unrelenting burden I had carried alone. My mother's hands trembled ever so slightly, but she tried to maintain the posture of control, the kind she had perfected over decades. "Maya," she whispered, voice tight, "you don't need to do this. We can talk, work it out." I shook my head slowly. "No, Mom, talking is what kept this going. You thrived in private. Conversations where you could rewrite reality. Tonight we have witnesses. Tonight truth has a voice, and it's mine." My father flipped through the pages carefully, scanning the transfers, the notes, the exact amounts, the messages where she had pleaded, cried, and manipulated. His face shifted with every line, a slow unraveling of disbelief, anger, and sorrow. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked me, genuinely perplexed. "Because," I replied calmly, "every time I tried, she would twist your memory of events." I became the liar, the ungrateful child, the one who didn't understand her. And I believed her. For too long I believed her. I looked across the table at my mother. Her eyes darted from my father to me, searching for a way to control, to gaslight, to make me look unstable. But I had planned for this. Every step, every reaction, every counter that she could possibly conjure, I had anticipated. She could no longer hold sway over my emotions. This was the culmination of 3 years of quiet torment, hidden labor, and unseen stress. For 3 years, I had carried her life in my bank account, in my time, in my energy. Tonight, that ended. Mom, do you see it now? I asked, voice steady, though my chest ached from the years of silent endurance. All these years, I've been paying your rent, covering your utilities, bailing you out on emergencies. And you've called me useless. You've humiliated me, insulted me. And for what? So you could keep control? Her lips parted, but no. Words came. She had no immediate comeback. The evidence left little room for fabrication, little room for excuses. The room was tense, charged, almost electrified with the energy of exposure. I turned slightly to include Sarah, my aunt, who had been quietly observing from the side. She gave me a subtle nod, a quiet encouragement. It's the same pattern, she said softly. Manipulation, guilt, false victimhood. You didn't cause this, Maya. It's the system she built. My father's eyes softened again, glancing at both of us. There was a rare unity forming here, one that had been absent. For years, hidden under the guise of polite family behavior. He wasn't angry at me. He was starting to see the full picture. My mother tried again, her voice rising, shaky but sharp. I did what I had to do to survive. You have no idea what it's like to live in my shoes. I leaned forward, voice controlled, precise. I lived in your shoes, Mom. I lived paying your bills while being called worthless, being mocked, being blamed for your struggles. I carried your life in my hands, and every day you reminded me that I was useless for doing it. The words hung in the air, heavy with accumulated truth. Around the restaurant, conversations faltered, murmurs spread. People were watching. My mother's carefully curated facade was crumbling layer by layer for all to see. Then came the moment I had been preparing for, the final confrontation of control. I opened my phone, pulling up the folder of recordings I had meticulously collected over months' calls. Messages, voice notes, snippets where her manipulations, guilt trips, and threats were clearly audible. I didn't press play immediately. I wanted her to see the inevitability of exposure first. Mom, tonight isn't just about money, I said, voice calm but unwavering. It's about accountability. You have used me, humiliated me, and kept me trapped in guilt for years. I am done. Her face paled. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. You can't show them, not in front of everyone. But my father's hand was firm on the envelope, holding the papers, the phone, the truth. It's done, he said quietly. With finality. This ends now. You will deal with your responsibilities, and Maya will not be involved. My mother's lips trembled. Her eyes flicked between the table and the people watching. Image, control, and perception, everything she had held onto so tightly was slipping away. I continued, voice steady, measured. For 3 years I have been the unseen support for your life, Mom, paying your bills, covering your debts, carrying the weight of your emergencies. Tonight you can't deny it. Tonight everyone here sees the reality, unaltered, unedited, unprotected by your manipulations. My father slowly folded the papers, sliding them toward her. You will take responsibility, he said simply. No more secrets. No more debts being hidden from the family. No more using Mia. Her voice cracked, sharp with anger and panic. You can't do this. You can't abandon me. But Sarah leaned forward, steady, precise. You abandoned Maya long ago, she said. She's just reclaiming her life. She's setting boundaries. And we're here to make sure those boundaries are respected. Around us, the reality of our words sank in. People nearby were observing, whispering, recording, noticing the unraveling of a controlled narrative that had lasted years. My mother's mask finally slipped entirely. I picked up my phone again, not to play the recordings this time, but to send the folder I had prepared to a private group I created earlier that day, including Sarah, my father, my grandmother, and cousins who had seen fragments but never the full picture. Within moments, phones buzzed, notifications lit up screens, eyes widened, whispers began. I had not exposed her to the public, but to the people who mattered, who had the context, who could validate reality. The proof could no longer be denied, ignored, or twisted. The final words were mine. Calm, resolute, steady, I am done paying your rent. I am done carrying your burdens. I am done being the daughter who exists solely to make you comfortable. From this day forward, your choices are your consequences, your debts are your responsibility, and I am reclaiming my life. I stood, the scrape of my chair against the floor echoing like a punctuation mark at the end of a long, suffocating sentence. Every gaze followed me, hers included. But for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt free. My life, my boundaries, my peace finally mine. The fallout would come later. My mother would lose her apartment, her social circle would fracture, and her image, the one she had so meticulously built over decades, would crumble. But I didn't need to watch it. I didn't need revenge in the classic sense. My revenge was my life, my freedom, my ability to breathe without the weight of her manipulations pressing down on me. And that in itself was more satisfying than any retribution I could have imagined. 3 months later, I woke up to a quiet morning, my first thought not about debt, panic, or my mother's demands, but about myself. Do I want oat milk or regular in my coffee? It felt monumental. My phone screen was silent, empty, free of guilt-laden messages. I had moved into a new apartment, paying my own rent, living under my own rules, and slowly I began to rebuild the life that had been buried under obligation for so long. My father and Sarah were supportive. My grandmother had stepped back, finally recognizing the manipulation I endured, and my mother. She was learning the hardest lesson: control has limits, and no one can live off another's guilt forever. For the first time, I understood that revenge wasn't about ruining someone else. It was about reclaiming your own life, and I had done that. The last trace of my old self, the part that trembled, that apologized, that carried debts that weren't mine, was gone. I had chosen myself, and in that choice I found a freedom I hadn't known I could have. The weeks after that night were strangely calm, almost surreal. My apartment felt like a sanctuary. No more unexpected calls, no more silent panics about bills I shouldn't have been paying. No more whispered threats that I was useless, incapable, unworthy. The freedom wasn't immediate, was subtle at first, a slow easing of tension in my chest that I hadn't realized had been there for years. I could finally breathe. Work became a different kind of challenge. I noticed myself pacing less, stopping myself from taking on extra shifts simply because it was expected that I always sacrifice my time for everyone else. I stopped over-apologizing for trivial things, and my boss noticed the difference immediately. "You seem more focused lately," she said. I nodded, silently acknowledging the shift in my internal world. My priorities had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't living to prop up someone else's image or absorb their consequences. Meanwhile, the fallout from my mother began quietly but decisively. Her apartment, once so carefully maintained to reflect the polished image she wanted the world to see, was lost. She refused to downsize at first, insisting someone would help, someone would cover her. No one did. My grandmother, Patricia, quietly withdrew financial support. My father, slowly but resolutely, started separating his finances and refusing to bail her out. And Sarah, ever vigilant, became my quiet anchor. She reminded me daily that I had done the right thing, that my boundaries were not cruelty, they were necessary. The texts from my mother fluctuated between apologies and manipulative anger. Some days, tearful, "I didn't realize I hurt you," and other days, venomous, "You've turned everyone against me. I hope you're happy ruining my life." I didn't respond. Not because I was cold, but because I had finally learned. That engagement would only pull me back into her cycle of control. My revenge was not to humiliate her publicly. It was to reclaim my life quietly, decisively, and permanently. Therapy sessions with Sarah and my father became a regular part of my routine. They helped me understand the patterns of manipulation, of covert emotional abuse that had defined my life with my mother. The word gaslighting surfaced more than once, and I realized it wasn't a strange or exotic concept. It was what had been happening to me daily, masked by polite family interactions and false concern. Each session peeled away layers of doubt I had carried, of self-blame that was never mine to bear. When my mother reached out to meet at a cafe weeks later, it was different. This wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There were no demands, no pleas for money, no accusations. It was neutral, a chance to have a conversation without coercion. She looked smaller, less polished, and for the first time, not entirely threatening. The acknowledgement in her eyes, small and hesitant, felt like a tentative bridge. "I lost my apartment," she said bluntly. I nodded, already aware. "Grandma told me," I said calmly. She paused, seeming to measure her words. "I was angry." "At you," she admitted. "I thought you had abandoned me." I listened, truly listened. And for the first time, I realized she was speaking from a place of recognition, not manipulation. "I started to see the numbers," she continued. "What? You were paying what I was spending, what I thought I needed. And I realized I had been living off you and others without seeing the reality." There was no justification, no excuses, just acknowledgement. The difference was striking. She wasn't asking me for money. She wasn't trying to control the narrative. She was admitting the truth. In her own way, we sat there quietly for a long moment, the hum of the cafe filling the silence. She wasn't perfect, and I wasn't forgiving her yet. But there was space now, a thin, fragile space for something different, possibility that this could evolve into a relationship based on honesty and respect, not fear and guilt. I told her gently but firmly, "I'm not ready to forgive fully. But if you continue counseling, if you stop asking for money, if you can speak to me without insults or manipulation, maybe we can start small. Texts, calls, neutral conversations. Nothing forced, nothing demanding. Just communication without coercion." Her lips trembled. "Fair," she whispered. And for the first time, it wasn't a trap or a setup. It was genuine recognition that boundaries had been set, that consequences existed, and that I was no longer a pawn in a game of emotional manipulation. I left that cafe with a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Not because my mother had been punished, but because I had finally chosen myself. Months passed, and life took on a rhythm I hadn't realized I had been missing. Mornings began without panic. I no longer checked my phone first thing for guilt-laden messages. My first thought was mine, not hers. Oat milk or regular in my coffee? Small freedoms, yes, but monumental when you've been living under constant pressure. Financially, I stabilized. I had moved into an apartment that was fully mine. Bills came from my own account, and I began saving cautiously, watching the numbers grow like fragile little seedlings. Work became more balanced. I wasn't volunteering for every extra shift, wasn't apologizing for taking a day off. Each small decision reinforced a growing sense of autonomy and strength. My mother's life, meanwhile, began its own transformation. The apartment she had clung to was gone, and her social network began to drift away. Invitations dried up, people created distance, not confrontation. My grandmother maintained boundaries, refusing to fund further missteps. Even my father began his own journey separating finances, seeking therapy, and slowly dismantling the patterns that had enabled her control. Messages from my mother became less frequent, more measured. Some still carried old anger, but others hinted at recognition, at reflection. She wasn't the controlling force she once was. I didn't need to respond to every message. I had established my boundaries clearly. If she wanted any semblance of relationship, it would be on my terms, with respect and honesty. The power I had reclaimed wasn't about revenge. It was about life. The control I once surrendered was mine again, and the relief was profound. Every small choice, paying my own bills, making my own plans, establishing my own limits, was a declaration of freedom. For the first time, I was living without the shadow of my mother's manipulations. Therapy continued to reinforce my understanding of what had happened. The lessons were clear. Manipulation thrives in silence, in private, in hidden obligations. Breaking that cycle required visibility, witnesses, documentation, and the courage to choose oneself over coerced loyalty. My father and Sarah became pillars in this process, their support steady, reassuring. The final months of the story were less dramatic, more about integration of self. I learned to trust my judgment, to prioritize my needs, and to navigate relationships without guilt. My mother's influence, once overwhelming, was now limited, bounded by clear rules and mutual recognition that past patterns were unacceptable. Our interactions, though still tentative, were based on accountability, not fear. In reflection, the revenge I had imagined, the exposure, the humiliation, the reclaiming of power had already happened. I didn't need to destroy her. I needed only to stop allowing her to destroy me. And in that, I found a peace and strength that no manipulation could ever take away again.